Hey guys, long time no see. So some of you might remember, if you followed me for this long, that I made a mouse review video a really long time ago about the Zowie ZA12. Going into that video, I didn't really expect much, but I got a lot of positive feedback, and people have asked me before when I'm making a new mouse review video. So here we are. I think I bring an interesting perspective to mice. I've been in esports for a long time. I've been a professional. I've played at the top level across multiple titles. So I know what makes the mouse good for me, I know what makes the mouse bad for me, and I can see through the gimmicks and the hype pretty well. So without further ado, here we go. For this video, we're going to review the new Vaxee Outset AX. So the Outset is essentially a mouse made in the image of the EC2. So it's an ergonomic mouse meant to be very comfortable when you palm grip it. It has that curve on the inside for the thumb. It has that hump on the back to fill your palm. And it has that little contour on the right side for your ring and your pinky finger. We'll start here by putting the Outset AX next to a couple similar mice, a couple new mice. You have the Outset AX here, the Zowie S2 here, the Zowie EC2 here, the Razor Viper Ultimate, and the glorious Model D. You can tell of this bunch, the Outset AX is the shortest of them, probably the most similar in length to the S2, noticeably shorter than the EC2, and even more so than the Razor Viper Ultimate and the glorious Model D, which is one of the biggest ergo mice on the market. The Outset AX has a very similar finish to the S2, so in that classic Zowie fashion, it has that meticulous finish that feels much smoother than something like the Razor Viper Ultimate, and even more, and even the glorious Model D, which you can't really tell as much because of the holes in the mouse, but I would say that even this finish is a little bit less smooth than you would find on the S2 and notably the Outset AX. Now I'm going to concentrate on comparing the Outset a little bit more to the EC2 because the Outset is the most analogous to the EC2 and I believe is a pure upgrade. So as you can see, the Outset is noticeably shorter or less long, but for what it lacks in that length, it makes up for in the width and the height. So the Outset AX comes in at 117.43 millimeters in length compared to the EC2's 120 millimeters. The width of the Outset AX comes in at 65 millimeters, while the EC2 is just 64. And the height of the Outset AX at its highest point comes in at 43 millimeters, while the EC2 is only at 40. So it might not seem like a big difference. There's 1 more millimeter added to the width of the Outset AX and 3 more added to the height, but it makes a big difference. So that difference is really noticeable when you're palming the mouse. So when I palm the Outset AX, because of that added height and width, it fills up the back of my palm a lot more than the EC2 would. So the EC2, definitely an extremely comfortable mouse, but most of the contact with my palm is along the pointer finger side of my palm. So right under this is where most of the contact with the mouse comes in, where the pinky side, the ring finger side of my palm is not as much in contact. It's almost like I'm leaning on my pointer finger side of my palm. Whereas with the Outset AX, that feel is a lot more balanced. So it's spread even across your palm, which I think gives a much more comfortable palm grip. It feels like you have a better grip around the mouse just because all of the pressure of the mouse comes in pretty evenly across your palm. Now for some more of the benefits to the Outset. So the Outset comes equipped with a Pixar PMW 3389 sensor compared to the 3360 of the EC2. The scroll wheel, much better on the Outset. Sounds great when you're scrolling. Great feedback when you're pressing down compared to the mushy scroll wheel of the EC2. The side buttons on the Outset are also much shorter than the side buttons on the EC2. So you have just less of the mouse being covered by the side buttons of the Outset, which I think is just a benefit. The side buttons of the EC2 can kind of get in the way if you're gripping the mouse, depending on how you grip it. Maybe you're just resting on half of the frame and half of the button. It's just not very comfortable. And then when you press in, you're pressing into the frame, into the body of the mouse the whole time. With the Outset, that's not a problem. Your thumb, my thumb, is very clearly underneath the buttons, never comes into contact unless I want to, and when I press the button, it doesn't come into contact with the body at all. You can hear it in the mic here. That's the feedback for each button. Sounds great, high quality. And mouse 1 and mouse 2 are also separate from the main body of the mouse on the Outset. So the main body is that S2 type matte finish, where if you drag your finger across, it's just hard to get from point A to point B, which is good. You want a good grip on the mouse, especially if you're palming it. Mouse 1 and mouse 2, though, are much more slippery, which I just think is more comfortable. You might just move your pointer and your middle finger a little bit more than you would think on a mouse. And if you just have more freedom to move them around, I think it's just all in all more comfortable. The underside has functionality you would find on a Zowie mouse. So you have a DPI toggle from 400 to 800 to 1600 to 3200, a mouse hertz toggle from 125 to 500 to 1000, and a click latency toggle from 2 milliseconds to 4 milliseconds to 8. I have it on 800 dpi, 1000 hertz, no problems as you'd expect, and 2 millisecond click latency. And I've noticed absolutely no double clicking issues. It's just very responsive. As for the liftoff distance on this mouse, you can do something similar to what you would do with a Zowie mouse. So if you unplug it and then replug it back in holding the mouse 1 and mouse 4, the polling rate setting will switch to the liftoff distance setting. So the 125 will be the lowest liftoff distance and the 1000 will be the highest. And now for the cable. So this mouse does come with a paracorded cable, so there's no more rubber floppy EC2 cable. However, it is a cable nonetheless. If I were to compare it to other paracords, I would say it's maybe most similar to the Viper Mini, definitely not as flexible as something on the Model D. I've never been bothered by cables. I'm not even using this mouse with a bungee, and it's perfectly fine with me. I know that a lot of people are bothered by cables, so if you're really into wireless and you can't buy a mouse that isn't wireless, I would just stay tuned to see when Vaxee plans to roll out wireless versions for their mice. If you're somebody like me who doesn't mind wires, then I don't think this will be any different for you. And now for maybe the most important part, the weight. So the Outset comes in at 76 grams without the cable. For reference, the EC2 is 90 grams without the cable, so the Outset's quite a bit lighter. However, it's not quite as light as something like the Viper Mini, the G Pro Superlight, or any of the ultralight mice out there. To be honest, I kind of like the weight on the Outset more, especially because I palm grip. When I palm, my fingers have no influence over the mouse, so there's no lateral movement or vertical movement with my fingertips. Instead, I just use my fingers to grip the mouse comfortably, and I let my wrist and my arm do all the movements. When the mouse is too light, it almost feels like I need to use my fingertips for that fine motor control. Since I don't and it's uncomfortable to me, a little extra weight is kind of beneficial. And I actually respect Vaxee a lot for that. Instead of following the trend and trying to make the weight as light as possible, for no other reason other than to be lighter than the other lightest mouse out there, Vaxee seems to have put real thought behind the weight of the mouse. So instead of just making their weight a selling point, it feels like there's reason behind it. So big ups to Vaxee for that. And here are just some clips of me playing Quake with the mouse. There were no issues with tracking, no issues with skipping, no spinouts. Even with 2 millisecond click latency, I found no issues with double clicking. I did mess with my sensitivity a fair amount with the Outset, so in these clips, I'm sort of oscillating between 38 and 43 centimeters per 360. I always like to do this with new mice. I think some mice are better suited for a higher sensitivity and others may be suited for a lower sensitivity. Obviously, it all has to do with your grip. When I'm using the mouse, I notice my grip is pretty pushed up on it, so the sensor is pretty close to my wrist. That doesn't really allow for a wide range of motion with only my wrist. Whereas if the mouse were a little bit longer or I were fingertipping it or something, the sensor would be further away from my wrist, which would allow for a wider range of motion. Eventually, after all this experimenting, I decided that a lower sensitivity would suit me better with this mouse. I don't think I get to use my wrist as much as I would with something, again, a little bit longer or maybe with something more of a fingertip grip. And as a result, I think I need to depend a little bit less on my wrist, only using it for those small little micro movements and using my arm for anything bigger. Again, this mainly depends on your grip. I know a lot of people who palm who don't have nearly as much of their palm on the mouse as I do. And this doesn't really bother me. I'm somebody who actually prefers using a lower sensitivity, even in games like Quake. And I think that's why I ended up liking this mouse so much. I like using low sensitivity, and for me, when I use low sensitivity, I want a mouse that allows me to grip it very firmly, just for maximum control. And despite the mouse not being as light as some of these ultralight mice out there, and a sensitivity that I feel is pretty low for Quake, I was able to whip around and look around with no problem whatsoever. So yeah, I'm really satisfied. It's pretty much everything I thought and hoped it would be. I've always been a fan of the EC2, so I was just looking for an EC2 with a better wire, a little bit lighter, some better features, and I think that's exactly what you get with this mouse. Thanks for watching, guys.